Insider over at dailyfaceoff.com. You can catch him this Friday on the Daily Faceoff Trade Deadline Show. That starts at 8 a.m. Pacific, goes till 1 p.m. East. Frank, how's your bladder? Do you take a break during the show? Or are you red zoning it? How does this work for you?
Yeah, I'm red zoning it. I'm well trained. I'm like a camel. I hang on to it all day.
Excellent. Good stuff. Frank joins us now. Frank, the Canucks in the trade deadline here. Honestly, there's a few key things we're all looking at, and we'll get into the specifics of it all, but we see it's a seller's market right now. Just the NHL trade market as a whole, it seems like a seller's market right now.
I don't agree, and I saw that notion posted somewhere. I don't know why who thinks that's the case or why they think that's the case, but go ahead.
Andy, the Trent Frederic price seemed like a bit of a high one to pay. Do you disagree?
No, I do disagree. It was go back and look at the article I posted on February 25th, the exact Trent Frederic scouting report. I laid out the potential deals. I said second round pick for Trent Frederic. The only reason there's additional pieces is because both teams retained 50% and they chopped him into a quarter. So no, the price was exactly what I thought it would be. And this isn't ornery Frank or someone tooting their horn. It's just that there's 43 pieces now left on my trade targets board. I've got 5 more names to add as the week goes on. There's more players available and more pieces available than there are teams willing to buy. So in my view, it's a buyer's market, not a seller's market.
Interesting. Okay. Well, my question was going to be based on the trade market, how you look at it right now. Like, do you think that encourages the Canucks to buy or sell the way things are going right now?
I think the Canucks are in a market unto their own. The biggest thing that the Canucks need to answer and ask themselves this week is, how important is it to us to make the Stanley Cup playoffs this year? Period. End of story. If it's very important, if there's business reasons, if there's competitive culture reasons, whatever it might be, that's going to determine everything from Brock Boeser to what happens with Elias Pettersson and how you view that situation moving forward, to Pius Suter and to everything else that the light could touch in Vancouver. It all revolves around that question and what is their mission and mandate from on top with Francesco Aquilini.
If there was a pie chart with the 3 possibilities of how the Canucks could approach Boeser's future, extending him, trading him, or keeping him as their own rental, what approximate percentages might you put on each possibility? What looks most likely to you right now?
I would put 40% on extending him, 25% on 25% on keeping him as a rental. So a 65% chance that Brock Boeser is a Vancouver Canuck past Friday at noon Pacific time. And I would put 35% on him being traded. What do you think about that?
I think that's great. I think it's reckless. I wrote about it. I think it's reckless to keep him as your own rental. They shouldn't do that. But
why?
Why is it reckless?
Yeah.
Because they've had Brock Boeser and they've lost games in pretty embarrassing fashion. And unless they're going to buy at the deadline, they're going to be without Quinn Hughes for a little bit longer, it looks like. Like, Brock Boeser's not helping them win games right now. So if you know you're not going to sign him, you need those assets that you're going to get for Brock Boeser. Because you might keep him as your own rental and then still miss the playoffs.
You might. But I can tell you that if you trade Brock Boeser, you're almost definitely missing the playoffs. And
I disagree.
And I will say that moving forward, again, it's an overall philosophical conversation. Do we need to vastly retool this team? And is Pettersson moving, whether it's now or before July 1st or before the draft, I should say? Because Miller's gone, and then if Pettersson's gone, and if you remove Brock Boeser, you have zero chance. Like, pack it in for the next 3+ years. I don't care what kind of magic Quinn Hughes can create. You don't have a chance to compete.
Okay, so when we talked about this, like I bring up Jonathan Lekramacky as a guy, 19 goals, 31 AHL games. He's been called up today. He's going to play in the top 6 as of line rushes today. So I look at that and I say, okay, like you have to run that risk of, okay, maybe we're a worse team with Lekramacky than Boeser, but how much worse is my question, because right now Brock Boeser's playing with Pius Suter. Like he's playing with third line centers, and ultimately, Frank, like the Canucks have nothing but third line centers right now. Filipino is this team's best center. So like the way I look at it is if you trade Pettersson and Boeser with the way they are playing right now, and you flip them for assets in the manner that they flipped JT Miller for Marcus Pettersson, Philip Hedl, and I guess you can throw Drew O'Connor in there as well. Like the Canucks are a much faster team with Hedl and with O'Connor. They're a better team defensively with Marcus Pettersson. So I look at that and I say, okay, A, what can you get in an Elias Pettersson trade, but B, what can you get in a Brock Boeser trade, and what can you flip those guys for that's going to help you now? Because I think we're all in agreement that this team wants to compete right now. If they're trading Boeser, they're trading Pettersson, they're not doing it to go get first-round picks and use those picks in the draft. Like, they're going to flip
no
them
team
as
is
assets.
giving you back current assets that you're going to use in a competitive fashion for Brock Boeser, because the only team that's going to be trading for Brock Boeser at this deadline is going to be a team that's in contender mode. Otherwise,
That's what I mean. So they would get the first, like they did with Miller, right? And then
I
flip
understand,
it to a team.
yeah, flipping it, but I'm saying you're going to do that in 3 days' time?
In like 4 hours time with the Miller night, right?
But that was different. That was already cooked. I mean, I guess they could be laying the same groundwork now. I would argue that if you think you're going to turn it around and make the playoffs this year, like again, more chaos, more bodies, more people that need to get assimilated, more nonsense. I don't see it happening, but that's just me.
I also don't care. Like, I think they should just play Lekramacky. Keep the first, use it at the draft. Like, not use it to draft, but flip it at the draft when teams have time to think or whatever you need time to lay the groundwork for. Sure, do that, but just play Lekramacky in that spot where Boeser would be. Because right now, Boeser's just not helping you win games. That's kind of where I'm coming at it from here. I really don't like the idea of them keeping him as a rental.
Okay, so then you also probably wouldn't like them keeping him extended, then, based on what I'm hearing.
No, I don't mind extending him. That's the thing, is if you're gonna
wait
extend
a
him,
second though. Hold on. So he's not helping the team, 1, playing third line role, 2, and you're like, yeah, let's give him 6 times 8
because he needs a center. That's why he's not playing well. So the idea would be you need to go get centers as well for Boeser to play well. It's just they don't have those right now. And to your point, like, I don't think they're gonna go get a center that Brock Boeser is gonna play with down the stretch.
The guy doesn't exist. I'm
Yeah.
not saying like there's no readily available fix, is my point.
But in the offseason, a year's time or whatever, they will find something.
Okay, but I'm just confused. That's all. Like, I get what you're saying. I just think, like, if you think that he's not helping you and you don't want to keep him as a rental, why would you be okay with 6 more years of him? Like, either he's helping your team get there or he's not.
I think the point Quads is trying to make is for this season, you're not able to put him in a position to succeed because of your personnel constraints down the middle and not having the right playmaker to unlock the most out of Brock, because he's a complimentary sniper. He doesn't drive play by himself, but the idea being when you're trying to retool the team in the summer, you can find that right playmaker. And so while you might not get a ton out of Boeser for the remainder of this season, if you extend him and the idea is to keep him as a long-term top 6 goal scorer, you can build the infrastructure around him to get him back to being that 30-goal guy.
Okay, so let me rewind to the beginning of our conversation, which was, what is the mission and mandate for the Vancouver Canucks? Are you trying to make the playoffs this year or not? Do you have a sense on how important that is to them or not?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're saying it is of importance or not?
For them to make the playoffs?
Yes.
Very much so, yes.
Okay. Then isn't just the proper play then to extend Brock Boeser and tack on the 6th year and just wash your hands and be done of it?
Sure. Yeah. I just think that they probably feel comfortable to a certain extent with where they're at. Like, here's the thing. And maybe I'm getting confused now because let me clarify. Are you getting at, like, the idea of keeping him through the deadline and then trying to extend him afterwards?
Yeah, I think their thought process would be, we really want to make, if they go down this path, we really want to make the playoffs this year, and we'll take another swing at Brock We're comfortable with him. He's comfortable with us. We'll take another swing before we get to July 1st and see if we can, sort of capitalize on the idea of him mentally moving on.
Yeah.
To take another, let me give you another example of this. This is what the Montreal Canadiens did today with Jake Evans. They got right to the finish line of, hey, bud, you're either accepting this offer or we're trading you. And their whole goal the entire time was to keep Jake Evans on a deal under $3 million a year because they wanted to reserve the right if they had another piece coming along, whether it was through draft, free agency, their prospect pipeline, a trade, and they were kind of boxed out from improving their team. They wanted to make sure that in the future, over these next 4 years with Jake Evans, that they could still move the contract. And at $2.85 million, they've not handicapped themselves in any sort of way. So when it comes to this type of deal, do you get close to that? Hey, you're a lifelong Vancouver Canuck. You've enjoyed it. We've appreciated your loyalty. Are you sure you want to move on? This is what we can offer you. Maybe you try and tug at those heartstrings. All I can tell you is that to this point, it's gone the other way. Based on the sort of dare that the Canucks gave to him at the end of last season and the summer. Hey, we're not extending you. You scored 40 and you want to be paid like that? Go out and do it again. It's almost like they're saying in parentheses, we don't believe you. And I think that plus how long this took to get to a solid place. And not only that, but as this has all dragged on, this is just my view only. Yeah. I believe that his eyes have been open to the chaos that's existed this season around him. I think it's always been, and for a lot of guys, they have blinders on. This is my team. I want to be here. You don't realize how toxic it is and how bad it is until you get out and you get somewhere else, or until you start to think about another team and an opportunity. And I think he's been nudged in that direction, that he's just sitting back right now going, look, I'm good either way. Either I'm going to go to market and there's going to be a team out there that pays me 6 or 7 years. And with the cap going up and with the goals that I score, I'm going to be in demand either way. Or Vancouver's going to step up and they're going to give me what I need to stay, and I can stay in a place that I'm comfortable and I like it. So he's in a no-lose situation. But the Canucks, who have orchestrated this game of chicken the whole time, are now trying to sort through, well, we've got a whole team in flux now. At one point, Brock was supposed to be the key secondary scoring piece for a team that was going to contend for a Stanley Cup. And now we're not only potentially not making the playoffs this year, but if stuff goes haywire with Pettersson and we have to take a step back for a couple years, does it really make sense to have Brock Boeser extended on a 6-year deal if it's going to take us 3 years to be competitive again?
I think you're bang on. And now I get what you're saying. So I think you're right. The Canucks do have to end this game of chicken the way that the Canadiens did with Jake Evans, where they just say, hey, this is what we're going to do, or we have to trade you. I agree with you there. I'm saying the idea of, yeah, we're just going to keep him as a rental. We'll try to do something before July 1st. I don't like that because for the reasons you just laid out, like, I don't think the Canucks gain any leverage by doing that. I think it actually goes the opposite direction if they do that. But we can move on from Boeser. I think I understand what you're saying, and I think you understand what I'm saying.
I do, but I also think that they're comfortable thinking that they can play on that loyalty factor if they get through Friday and don't have a deal done with him and keep him. That's all.
Interesting. Okay. Do you think there's one more offer coming, like before this?
Yeah,
deadline?
I think it's like today, tomorrow, whatever it might be. You're going to get the Canucks best and final, and they're going to see how you react to that to understand what they need to do next.
I wanted to ask you about Elias Pettersson and his future. How patient do you expect management to be? I think we all know a move before the deadline is unlikely, but also from the perspective of everybody's been talking about his no-move clause, which kicks in on July 1st. From the organization's perspective, how urgent of a people who are skeptical about Pettersson in this fan base are looking at that as like that's a ticking time bomb. You got to get out from under that before that July 1st NMC kicks in. But there's the other perspective where there are lots of examples of guy has an NMC, and if it, there's a theory that maybe this year's just a wash. Your best shot at having a first line center for next year is kind of rolling the dice on him again. And if things don't go as planned, then you can still, the player's going to be in a position where probably wants a fresh start. So even though he has an NMC, he's probably going to be willing to move on and give you a bunch of teams that he's willing to go to. From the organization's perspective, how big is that July 1st NMC date as far as making a decision on his future?
Harm, I think it's critically important. I don't think you can allow Pettersson to have any leverage or say in the process. The last thing you want is to be held hostage with a guy that you don't want there, and he's not productive, and he has a massive contract. What if he's here's another example, another recent real world example. Seth Jones gave the Chicago Blackhawks 2 teams to which he would accept a trade: Dallas and Florida. The Stars have so many young players to pay, starting with Wyatt Johnson, that they said, we're not interested. We just can't even get involved in the Seth Jones conversation, even at $2.5 million retained. Suddenly, the Hawks are left with 1 team to deal with. And luckily for them, it was kept under wraps that the Florida Panthers were the only team left that he was willing to accept a deal to. Because if Florida finds that information out, they can leverage the hell out of the Hawks and the return. And instead, Chicago got a deal that worked for them, and they were able to pull the trigger. The last thing you want is Pettersson telling your team, I'm only going to accept a trade to the LA Kings. Pick a team in division, pick a team anywhere. He can do and say whatever he wants. You can't let it get to that point. And when you talk about, hey, well, maybe he'll rebound. If you're going to have a number 1 center, this is your best chance. I get the thought process and where you're coming from, but I'm going to side with, at that point, 17 months of evidence or 16 months of evidence that not only is Pettersson broken, but is especially broken in Vancouver, that it's not, all the pieces aren't going to be put back together. Is there a chance that he snaps out of it? I think if we were going to see that, we would have started to see that at 4 Nations. That would have been the catalyst. If not the Miller trade, then it would have been, hey, this guy's around his countrymen, speaking his own language, gets a shot in the arm of confidence, playing with players that he knows and likes, playing with talented players that he knows and likes. All that did for me for 4 Nations was remove every excuse possible. And then all of a sudden we're back to the knee and the tendonitis and whatever else. And it's just like, you're making this much money. You have to produce. You have to be a driver. And Canucks fans haven't wanted to hear that. And from me, they think that I'm a Pettersson hater or that I'm negative or whatever it might be. I'm just telling you from an asset management standpoint, how everyone else around the league looks at it. And this quote that I've used a couple times from an NHL manager that says, there's not one team in the league that could acquire Elias Pettersson right now and feel 100% good about it, rings true. But at least right now, there's some mystique. There's we think we could be the team that unlocks that power once again, the 40-goal, 100-point dynamic player that we once saw. The longer it goes on, the more we see, the less likely someone is going to be buying on that. And not only that, I think we're already at the point now where his value has plummeted so much that I don't know that there is a return for him.
Interesting, because that was going to be my next question, was the thing we've heard all along, like Harman and I, when we do our poking around about it, is, well, of course there's going to be a return for Elias Pettersson. Obviously, the Hurricanes and the Canucks were talking about Pettersson before the Mikko Rantanen trade went down. So you look at that and say, oh, would they have gotten Natchez? Would it have been more? Whatever. Then you have 4 Nations. Now you have more of a sample size. So this is the question on everybody's mind, is like, What is the return for an Elias Pettersson trade at the deadline, and how much does that change when you get to the offseason if this play continues? And Frank, for the Pettersson Canucks hater allegations that you're facing, I gave out that exact same take as you last week. I was talking about I don't think he's turning around in Vancouver, so you'll be pleased to know that. But back to my question, what's his value right now, ahead of the deadline? What's his value in the offseason if this play continues and doesn't turn around the way you and I both think it won't?
I think you're asking someone to take on $80+ million. I don't know how you could then extract a return on top of that with the risk that someone's taking on. I mean, this guy is at the point in time where he's basically looking at $1 million per goal. Like, I'm being facetious, but not really. That's tough. That's tough to manage, tough to look at, tough to think about, let alone, you can find a team with the cap increasing the way that it is to be willing to take on the risk. But the risk is heavy enough alone that the acquisition cost on top of it, I think it would be enough for a lot of teams, unless I'm vastly misreading the market. But based on conversations I've had, I really don't know how much you're getting for him. So
Interesting.
Really, if you're the Canucks, what you really have to focus on is what's the bigger risk? Not getting something for someone whose play could blossom again, or being stuck with this contract for the next 7 years and significantly impacting our ability to build a team. Would you rather a buyout or would you rather a trade for nothing now? I mean, those are the types of thought processes that they have to be working through.
I just wonder if you can get it. If you can get two teams that actually want him and can fit him, you're getting something. I think.
What's we'll the see. Something, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Riddle me this. And sorry this is turning into a long hit. I know you're busy this time of year, so if you got to go, you got to go. But I got to ask you this.
I have 5 more minutes.
Okay. I got to ask you this. This stuff with the Carolina Hurricanes, there were reports out there that the Canes were looking at Elias Pettersson that day. There was conversations between the Canucks and Hurricanes that day. And one thing I read, don't remember who I read it from,
what is that day? What are you saying?
The day Rantanen coming out from Jason Bruff here in Vancouver that the Canucks were working on something big in Vancouver that was later discussed to be Elias Pettersson trade with the Canes.
I don't remember the exact timeline, and I'm not pouring cold water on it. I do think the Canes and Canucks had talked Pettersson at some point, but my understanding is they were pretty engaged on Rantanen for a while, and the other piece that the Canes were talking about in that moment in time, I think, was Mitch Marner.
Okay. Because my question was going to be, do you see the Canes, if they lose out on Mikko Rantanen and don't get to re-sign him, do you see the Canes kind of circling back on that avenue if they liked Pettersson in the past? And again, they were connected to him before this contract was even signed as well.
Okay, so let's think about the Canes and how they go about business. They don't want to pay. They're willing to pay money, but they won't be willing to pay an acquisition cost at the same time. So they're the ultimate tire kickers. They keep checking on everyone. Even if you think about it in the grand scheme, Gensel and Rantanen, back-to-back deadlines, the two best players available. They didn't trade a first-round pick or any of their top 5 prospects. They basically, if Rantanen ends up walking at the end of this, what they really traded was the last year and a half of Marty Necas before he was ultimately going to move on too. So I look at that and I say, yeah, maybe they're obviously intrigued by the player, but they're one of those teams that are like, we'll just absolve you of the risk and the financial implications of Pettersson, and you give him to us for nothing. Yeah, I think they could be interested in that, but I don't think they're going to be giving up anything significant to do it. That's not how they do business. They understand leverage as well as anyone.
Is there a player around the league that maybe isn't appearing as prominently on a lot of different trade boards that you're kind of keeping an eye on as a dark horse?
Like what would be a surprising trade?
Yeah, like either it could be a player or even if you want to go in the direction of a team that maybe makes an unexpected splash, is there something ahead of this deadline, a storyline that you're keeping an eye on that maybe isn't getting a lot of mainstream attention right now?
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about the Tampa Bay Lightning today and what they're targeting. I know Florida went out across the state and they made their big move with Seth Jones, and they've still got LTIR money to spend potentially with Matthew Tkachuk's deal. But I'm pretty sure Tampa's up to something. And it sounds like it might be big. But the interesting thing about Tampa and the way they do business is Julian Brisebois is not one of those GMs that kind of canvasses the league and talks to everyone about what he's thinking or gets a real good understanding of the market. What they do is him and his team, their scouts, they hone in on one fit or two fits maybe. And then they engage with that team directly and it's like, boom, it's done. And we saw the waivers today. They did put Cam Atkinson on waivers, gives them roster flexibility and maybe a touch more cap space. What is Tampa up to? Because they've been one of the hottest teams in the league. They lost last night, but they had won 8 in a row before that. Vasilevsky's back to his numbers. Point, Kucherov, Seravalli, Hedman, they're all still there. And John Cooper and his Team Canada guys are riding high off of Four Nations. So, it could be a fascinating arms race just in Florida alone with those two teams, which then brings you to what about the Toronto Maple Leafs and what are they going to do in that division?